Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Keynsham. And I'd like to welcome Councillor Nick Chard, the Chair of Medway Local Authority, and Chief Officer Sydney Lodin from Hampshire Fire Rescue Service with us today, and the reason for their attendance will become very clear in a few moments' time, so thank you and welcome. First of all, as item 1 on the agenda, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Councillor Davis talking Jackson, Wingles and Glen.
Richard, you want to make others?
Yes, the time ago to say wouldn't be universally popular, but I have a reputation for not even saying popular correctly, and I'm sure that will continue in the future. As you know, we have a daunting agenda before us today. I'm sure you'll whip us through that in an efficient fashion, Chairman, but I'm equally conscious, actually, it will require you being quite robust in chairing us, and what I would expect challenging debate. In my view, any spurious or possibly vexatious points will just prolong matter and obviously take longer. So I trust you'll be robust. And personally speaking, if you wish to use the threat of capital punishment, that seems fine with me.
Thank you, Richard, for that intervention. I do have some gallows being erected by the service just outside.
We've got a hung parliament, so
That's what I'm going to have it. Okay, so sorry, did we have any other apologies for absence? Thank you. And we are not video recording, and the video recording will be available after the 2nd of May, after the election day in 3 of our 4 member authorities. And I would remind you that we are in the pre-election period, so any obvious electioneering being conducted by any member, either for themselves or on behalf of their parties, is not permissible. So I would ask that you are careful in what you say, please. Item 2 on the agenda, emergency evacuation procedure. I'll leave it to our professionals.
Thank you, Chair, members and members of the public. Two exits to the room, both in each corners. There are 2 stairways also. I'm sure you've used the stairways when you came in. One to the right, to my right here, and one through the IT area and down into the lower ground floor. Exits on the side, both sides of the building, and the congregate out on the front of the building there. We're not expecting any fire drill this morning, so if the fire alarm does go off, it's likely to be an evacuation situation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any declaration of interest?
Chair, in respect of the principal sector officers, they are need to go out in section 7.3a, but probably will stay in the room. But Kevin Woodward will need to their interest in 7.3b and leave as necessary.
Now, I'm going to chair's business. Well, I think first of all, I'd like to say thank you to my colleagues here and to the officers who've served as well in this 4-year period of our authority. Several of us, this will be the last authority meeting. Election in 3 of the 4 authorities, so the next meeting in June will have a completely different complexion. I think that I would ask today that we spend as much time looking forward to that new authority and planning accordingly, rather than rehashing the past. And on a personal note, I'd like to thank 3 members of the authority who, under our 8-year rule, will now be retiring. Chris Jackson and Chris Davis are both absent today, but Alan Hale, and I'd like to record in the minutes my thanks, and I'm sure all the authorities' thanks for the work they've done on behalf of the residents of the Avon area. And I'd like to Andrew to just come forward for a moment, please.
I know it's a very small item, but there's a certificate there. Thank you, Alan.
service.
So thank you, Alan. I'm sure that the fire authority's loss will equal Keynsham and areas gained in the next 4 years.
Isn't that election year?
That could be.
Chairman, we might even be upsetting. Mr. Goodman will understand what I mean.
If you're up for election, if you could hand in your ID badges at the end, please.
Mine's in my car.
Okay.
So sorry about that.
Don't worry.
It's a souvenir, isn't it?
Okay, now I'm going to change round the agenda now because we have our two guests who travel.
Chair, before we leave that, because I'm sure Chris would have done it if he was here, and I'm more than happy to do it, but to thank you for the work that you've done being chair and stepping in at a very difficult time to chair the authority over the last few years. So just to put on record, thank you very much for all your work.
Here you go.
I was going to change, thank you very much, it's very kind of you. I was going to change the agenda around to now bring on item number 9, which is the improvement programme peer review report, and I'm going to hand over to the Chief Fire Officer to lead on that item.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll ask Councillor Chard and Chief Officer Neil Owen to introduce themselves in a minute, and they represent two members the outcomes of their findings as a result of doing a mid-stage peer review of our progress against our action plan. I just wanted to set a bit of context here. So members will be aware that we had the Baker report, and of that the Fire Authority's 62 points recommendations, action plan, 115 deliverables within that action plan. What I wanted to do was to commission some work as a mid-stage review of the improvement programme to say, okay, you set out that course to steer with those improvements and those actions. Can we have somebody independently to come and have a view at the halfway stage to say whether or not we are on track, and to provide us with some feedback so that we can make sure that we remain on track with the right impetus, with the right progress, and moving in the right direction. So I don't want to steal their thunder in any way. I'll hand over to, I believe, Nick, Councillor Nick Chard now, who will lead us through this piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chairman, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for inviting us down in January. I'm going to talk to a few slides. If you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll try to elevate my voice. I'd rather sit down because I think this is more of a presentation, and then hopefully there'll be time, if you'll allow, Chairman, some questions and answers. I'll do part of the presentation, Neil will do the rest. So I'm Nick Chard, I'm Chair of Kent and Medway Fire Authority, and I've had the pleasure of doing more than one of these peer challenges. So let me go on first of all, if I can get the technology to work. This is who was on the team. So as I said, Neil, who's to my right, myself, Matt Robertson, who worked to Neil, and Emily McGuinness, who's somewhere on the M5. The M5 is not moving very quickly this morning, I think, from the south, and she texted or she emailed earlier to say that she's been stuck in a traffic queue. So she was going to be here, but she isn't. But that was the team. The purpose. Mick's quite rightly said, I mean, the point is to come in as peers. This is not an inspection, it wasn't an inspection, so we come in as critical friends, and I think the timing was really good in terms of it came after the Baker report, and it's a good midway point to come and to see how things are going. So what we're here to do was not to act as an inspector, but to act as critical friends, and knowing the business, we were able to do that. So this is what we did. I won't read it through because you can see, but what this whole slide is supposed to demonstrate is we didn't just come in for half a day, talk to a couple of people and go home. We had 2 full days on site. We spoke to a lot of people, We had about 60 hours of conversations of data, so that's what really helped to inform our views at the end of the couple of days. So it was quite intensive. These slides will be available, by the way, so please don't feel you have to try to write it all down. So what we were asked to do, what we were invited in to do, was to do a fairly bespoke challenge to, as Mick said, to look at the interim of where the authority was, and in particular to look at the 4 elements, so governance, leadership, culture and driving change. So that's what we tended to focus our work on. The next slide is the obvious, but Zoe was an absolute star and helped us, and you all made us very welcome to all that we spoke with, and we not only met in person, but I did a number of telephone interviews as well. So it was really well run, was very smoothly done, and so that was really great, and a big thank you from the team. So we get to some of the quotes, and these are actual quotes, and all of the quotes are non-attributable, but these are some of the quotes that we've plucked out. Oh, sorry, I haven't moved the screen on. I'm reading from here and not from there. I think the top left one, feeling confident that that positive change will come. There's a mindset of wanting to move forward, of trying hard to move forward. There was a lot of support for the leadership of the service in particular, and you can read those, and they're self-explanatory. So there are still areas there that we felt needed to be addressed, needed to be looked at in a little bit more depth. So these were the overall messages and observations, the green being the more positive ones, the red being the less positive ones. So there was, the underlying, I suppose the whole word coming out of the couple of days on site was optimism. That we felt was incredibly strong. The senior leadership board, everybody was very supportive. I won't spare Mick's blushes, but they were particularly supportive of Mick as Chief Fire Officer. However, and there's often a however, there were issues that we felt that Mick and the senior leadership board needed a bit more capacity at that very top level. We felt that there was a really good established trust, although there are issues around some of the officer and members' cohesion. So these, I'm sure, don't come as any great surprise. Neil's going to take over when he wants to feel I'm not doing justice to these, and we're just going through the headline things. The strong IIP governance, but there was a risk of over-analysing all of the data, all of the performance management, and getting into the weeds too much. IRMP and service plan, but there was a sense of needing a bit more space to actually deliver it. Neil can help me on the leadership charter and unified authority.
So you're considering a plan today, members, and I know that it was good for us to see the early plan and the early consultation taking place in that regard. The space to deliver was to avoid trying to be overly monitored by others, including us, to get on and deliver the plan for your community. Leadership charter was something which had been recently developed, recently released, and that was seen as a really positive strength in terms of laying out what good looks like in leadership behaviours and values underlying that, and that came through really, really clearly. The issue which Councillor Charles already mentioned, the unifying authority, is getting the fire authority seen in the same light as the senior leadership team is as well, and that will take time. And you've talked about that, the change in our post-May authority that may well provide the opportunity for the future as well. Staff engagement, that was very much about making sure the whole of your workforce, the staff out at fire stations, in offices and others, and doing really important work for your community, buy into that entire journey. We didn't get a chance to spend time on fire stations or everywhere within the fire service, but that's something to test to make sure that the early signs of this really positive move are channeling away all the way through the organisation and indeed to the community that you serve. As ever in all organisations, it wasn't just middle management, it was entire management change to make sure they feature. We picked up very early some sense of stalling in the message, which always happens. There's always a lag in organisations such as this, but making sure that you as fire authority and indeed the senior team keep driving that message home all the way through. Clearly the organisation is ready to move on from the history it's had, and it's a real sense of optimism about the future. It looks very bright. And laying out in your future about what roles members have in that, we'll come on more in a second about what that means, will be really helpful for fire rescue service staff as well as your community.
So will we then move on to the first element, first of the four, and that's governance. Clearly very, very strong officer governance of IIB process. I think the one thing which the second point alludes to is some of the involvement of members. There's a lack of understanding really of what their roles could be or should be, so that could be clarified. And there were several meetings that weren't core-ate that we were aware of. So we wanted to, I wanted to support. The next one was written in January, and it was when you were talking about the Constitution, and we did feel that it would be really helpful to have the Constitution done and dusted before the May elections in a few weeks' time. But I will put a big caveat to that, and that is that if the Constitution isn't agreed by all, I think that it would be much preferable to leave it until the next intake, and actually use that as part of the induction process, to have that as part of the of whenever it is in the late spring, early summer, because I think that could be very useful. I know there's a lot of time has been spent on the Constitution, and I think unfortunately it hasn't reached the degree of resolution that it was intended to. So that might be something to consider. The other thing was really understanding what good governance looks like and means, and the balance of the profile. And I think it's not unique to Avon, the balance between the service and the authority. And it's not lost on the audience here, but sometimes it can be quite challenging to know what is the level of profile of both the service and the authority. Neil, you were going to go on and talk about leadership.
And leading on from the point that we've just made about the temptation for chief officers, quite understandably, to lead off into the future with a big flag saying, "Follow me, people." The danger is that fire authorities can find themselves in the shadow of chief officers that are trying to do their best to lead in this space. And so, but that's not to diminish the important work of the leadership space that Mick and his team have filled. So we mentioned earlier, overt sense of optimism. It's not just an underlying optimism, it's an overt sense of optimism about the future. Force for good, as it says there, clear sense of belief in plans for change. And indeed we talked to a number of different bodies, including the trade unions, to make sure we had a cross-section of views and belief in the current situation. And so trust across the organisation in the new SLB members is very, very high. Now, many services would pay big money to have that sort of trust. So the bedrock, the building of the future is absolutely there. Past events may still cast a shadow. Fire authority would benefit from a stronger sense of identity and purpose. So this is the point I make about lag and the danger of leaving a chief officer and his team in the leadership space. The fire authority need to take that space up as well and say it is us that lead the fire rescue service. The staff quite rightly are led by the chief officer and his team, but there is a sense of fire authority filling a space in the future. It requires strong organisational leadership to be matched by strong political leadership. One thing can't happen without the other. It's very difficult to lead an organisation in the constructs of perhaps what would have been in the past, but now looking forward, the future fire authority and the chief officer team would be really well placed to spend more time together building the understanding about whose space is which, because that's a really important construct in there. You need lots of conversations, lots of understanding, and exchange of language to understand where that space, where the domains lie. We mentioned earlier additional senior leadership capacity. This, in our view, and this is only a view, would allow the chief officer to divert some of his time and effort into building the fire authority in the future, making sure that our language is understood. He understands his space as well as you understand your space, so that tension, that necessary tension between officers and members, is maintained. And that's a really important part about space and capacity for the chief officer and his team. That's why we mention it in our findings in leadership. And leading on from that, culture, because it was a very important growth aspect for Avon, I think understandably so, it is for many fire and rescue services. Staff engagement network is valued for honesty and respect shown by senior managers. So there's a really, really positive network growing, and your staff feel very much that they've got a voice and they can voice their opinions. There will clearly be pockets around the organisation that still feel not listened to. There's a difference between having a voice and being not listened to, and that's sometimes about a matter of perception, and that's one to explore more. But clearly your staff are keen to be involved in the cultural journey of this organisation, and that's a great start. Organisation belief that a cultural change has started at the top will happen, so that belief that what we say we will do, I mentioned earlier with the new leadership charter, there's a sense of belief in that. It's not just a set of words, which are so easy to publish, a set of values, you can write some words down, and you end up in kind of Enron status where it kind of falls apart behind you. You've got some very good words but no actions. That action seems to be absolutely believed in. And we mentioned here, we've left it in here because it was where it came from in our first findings. We all say in the peer reviews, we can only reflect what we hear and see. But we have to translate it sometimes. But this is what so we're not blaming middle management, because they're easy to blame, aren't they? All middle managers, tiers tend to get the blame. It's not about middle management. It's actually about management of tiers. Our first point of contact with where the rubber might start to happen is always there. Now, I know that Mick and his team are working hard to make sure that the belief in the journey continues through middle management into the firefighters and others in the organisation, and that clearly is starting to happen. And there is always, and this goes back to most organisations, a sense that life is better at quarters head. There's a headquarters-centric, the bubble at headquarters type of thing, which is always tempting to blame that the kind of the white spires of headquarters. It's their fault, and that's, I suppose, endemic in most organisations like this. Certainly, it's in mine as well as it is, I'm sure, everybody else's. That's something to focus on and think about how we might move that away in the future. And lastly, the part about driving change. The organisation wants to move on and move forward with positive change. There's something about the team have got a fantastic handle on how you're doing against that. The focus on programme management and improvement, they're well prepared and they're progressing positively, so they're reporting well. There's something about reporting back to the fire authority in a more practical way, we feel, and that's something we can build on. But it's responsibility for the fire authority to consider how they proactively support to enable and drive change. So again, come back to that domain. Which bit is the fire authority to decide? Which bit is the chief officer and his team to decide what happens next? And that's very much the question you'll be considering later on with your IRMP and your and the HMI improvement plan. All those things fall into both those categories. The conversations that need to continue into this year are about who does what in that space. The danger is authority get too involved in officer work, or officers get too involved in authority work, the edges blur, and that becomes dangerous and unhelpful. So, again, the clarity, focus, hierarchy of plans. Swim lanes, that's a lovely phrase which we kind of interpreted for what we saw. So a number of different plans, because you've been analysed and been recommended from several different agencies, including us, you've got a number of plans to show improvement. At least 4, I think, and certainly the Chief Officer's plan is to bring the swim lanes into one plan, which gives Avon its future, gives the fire authority its future and its direction. I think that's really well recognised. I think it's exactly what needs to happen, but we must allow agencies which are looking on at this fire authority, this service, must allow you to deliver, and that's the message we want to give loud and clear. Because the more you are scrutinised and challenged, there's something about measuring a pig doesn't make it fatter. The point here is keep measuring something that doesn't make it better. You need space to get on and do what you think you'll do now, and that's our clear recommendation that we would like to make. As about external engagement, AFRS and AFRA profile. So that sense of you've got a really positive message to send. Understandably, there's a bit of navel gazing that's been going on about where we go next, what we do next. But I certainly, looking at some of your stats, I can speak personally as the Chief Officer of Hampshire, I would love to have some of your stats in my service. You're doing very well as a service in places, and I think that should be to be celebrated and turned back to our staff and congratulated them on the work they've done. And indeed, you as a fire authority too. Understandably, we want to focus on things that need improving, that's good, but do not miss the opportunity to celebrate what is good about this organisation. So I recognise that recommendations up here aren't quite the same as the ones in your report. So we'll, between us, go through the recommendations so we can be clear. I guess the starting point is to be bold in moving forward. You have a great service, you have a great opportunity for the future. Take confidence in what you've achieved to date and move decisively in the next phase of implementation. So good plans, have some belief. The new authority will form and it will have the opportunity to continue to drive the service in the right direction. Enhanced reporting of the improved action plan. That's talking about how we report to members on that improvement plan. You have papers today. It's up to you to drive the detail you require of the Chief Officer. The advice I'll give you is have those conversations with the Chief Officer about what you require and why you require it. But also allow the Chief Officer to push back, to ask you why you need that. Because there's an element of trust in him and his team, an element of the things you should be scrutinising. The challenge I would have, and I've seen this in other fire authorities, is if we're not careful, we get to a point where we don't recognise who are officers and who are members. And that divide is really, really important to maintain. I've mentioned senior level capacity, number 3 there, to ensure focus and prioritisation to provide the necessary organisational and authority development. That can only happen if Mick's got the capacity behind him to continue to drive the service in the way he has started. And that's something you need to think about for his own future as well. Nick, do you want to comment on It's here.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just checking that I've got it up here. I'm trying to do thing. The induction process. I mean, I think it's really quite challenging to have a fire authority made up of 4 different councils. I think it adds a degree of complexity, and it's going to be really important, the induction process that you're going to have up post-May, which is actually quite soon. So I don't think, it's an area that we've looked at, so it's proactively support members to reach their potential, to really make it worth their while as well. Establish clear roles for officers and members, and that, I think, is around making sure that the officers and members work more as a team, as a top team development. That we should be doing, that you should be doing more of, we believe, and engaging more with the middle managers. Neil mentioned that the top level we are very impressed with. It's that middle tier that I think needs more encouragement to change, that cultural change. The HQ environment, I think, is a bit of an issue. Now, I know you've been doing all these meetings around the place, and we're here, and last time we met somewhere else. I think one of the reasons why it's quite difficult in HQ because of the police security, but I think you have a home, and I think you should spend more time at home, but it's about the working environment of that HQ and the accessibility in the field. I know Mick's been working on it, and it's not resolved, but I think it's important. I think it's important for the cohesion, for the identity, for lots of reasons. Oh, that was it. So those were the recommendations. Neil and I are very happy to try and fend questions if there are any questions, and take any comments.
Well, first of all, Andy, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the service and the authority for the work you've done. I know that you're supported by others, including Emily and Sally, who hasn't got to us today, the traffic officer. Thank you very much, and I'd also like to thank you particularly for the fact that you've done a peer review, the previous one we had, which is written in plain language with proper recommendations rather than in code. So I thank you very much for that. You looked at us, you critically assessed us, and you come back some recommendations which everybody can fully understand. So I'm extremely grateful for that, and thank you forthright in your comments for that. I'd like to suggest that in terms of recommendations, that we look at the recommendations on page 76 of our papers, and my proposal would be from that we pass those to the next authority when it makes its AGM in June of this year to come forward with a proper action plan to implement those recommendations. And based upon that, I'd like to open up the debate. I'm sure that both me and Nick are happy to take any questions. I'll take those questions anyway, so. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely fine. Yeah, do.
Well done.
Yes, thank you, Nick. If I were to comment on any one particular recommendation, it would be number 5, and I fully agree with you that it is for discussion that we defer acceptance of the Constitution until a new file authority is proposed, established and trained and in place generally. And I will come back to that in due course. But I do support that proposal.
Agreed. Shirley?
Chairman, Emily, who can't be here, gave a verbal report to the penultimate performance review and scrutiny, which I'm on. I intend to probably summarise the views I mentioned there. Only Tony was here and Mark had to leave before. First of all, can I say, echo your thanks to the peer review team. I believe it's a very effective and very helpful feature of work. And as a relative new boy, I've been here for 9 months or 10 months. In a way, that's a weakness, but as Tony says, it also can be a strength. It does actually reflect my personal experiences. Elsewhere in the agenda, we have the HMI report, etc. And in my view, that more focuses on what you've naturally achieved. You're really going a stage further to say, are you putting things in place and do you have the resources to actually achieve betterment? And as a resident new boy, I'm convinced in the short period of time I've been here, the members and officers recognise the historic failings and are serious about actually progressing change. And I think it's very valuable with your comments because it reassures us we're heading in the right way. So I thank you for that. Could I just actually mention one feature? You mentioned the necessity of involving members increasingly and the induction course. Now, as one of 3 new Bristol members last year, so I was probably a guinea pig. But in my view, and certainly the 2 members who can be here, we believe it was very effective. So thanks for the officers and members of staff who arranged that. And I believe it actually really imbued us with the ethos and what you're seeking to achieve. So yes, I think it worked, and hopefully it will be rolled out for the new members, of course, after May.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask Nick and Neil how they envisage making the authority members a more cohesive group, because as you know, as you've said, we've got 4 authorities, different political groups, some very strong personalities with strongly held views. Is this something you had to achieve in your own authorities? And if so, or if not, how would you foresee it going forward? Do we have to have building rafts? I mean...
Yeah, well, my own personal preference, Chairman, is away days, but not building rafts.
I think she was only floating that way.
Yeah, I think she was, yeah. No, that's very good. I do think that, first of all, understanding what is the common thread, what is the common goal, the common purpose is actually quite helpful. Because I think members and officers will have a common goal, and it should be centred around what we can do for our communities. And so there's a good starting point. I think that one of these facilitated away days, just to get some core cultural feelings about what the organisation is. To have, and Neil's right, there needs to be the degree of separation between members and officers, but the organisations that work well is where that there are clear boundaries, but they work very well collaboratively together. And I don't think I'm arguing against myself there. That there is clarity about the role of each, but the two, particularly the chairman and the chief fire officer, there's a boundary, but they work very well together, and that's the same for the authority and the senior management team. So yeah, I like the idea of away days, and I think rather than the fairly formulaic committee meetings, I personally really enjoy an away day, and as long as you've got some structure to it and what you want to achieve from it, but I think you can achieve more, particularly around some of the big strategic things about IRMPs and all of those other things. Where are we going? What do we want to do? I think it's really helpful.
If I may, Kevin, to add to those points, in my experience, you hear a lot about politics being the art of the possible. I think that's true in many occasions. You also hear fire authorities described as single-purpose authorities. Compared to local authorities, they absolutely are. But often we'll find that politics creeps into single-purpose authorities and makes them more than they should be. So I have 3 different constituencies with different colours in my fire authority, and that works very well. I wouldn't say all plan. I've actually years and years have created that. That's just a habit of not doing political things in that space, or rarely doing political things in that space. But clearly there are things that come along that have to have political views, and that's happened. I guess and that's why I think, in my experience, the away days work well, because there's a relationship formed outside of business as usual in your constituent authorities, and it's a question of knowing each other for the purposes of supporting and driving the chief officer and his team, rather than any other purpose. And I think if we can keep our minds in that space, as an officer, that's incredibly helpful. Otherwise, too much time is spent doing things which are not helpful for the fire service, and they're helpful for other reasons, I'm sure, in places, but they're not helpful for the fire service. And that's my observations about against good and not so good. So the question of what does good look like for us was what authorities, and I'm sure Nick and I wouldn't pass forward saying please go look at ours, although you'd be welcome to, but what services out there, what authorities out there are operating in that way that you might want to consider and think, how does that work? What is the mechanics of that? And I'm sure the LGA will be helpful in making that help.
Thank you.
And Neil Butters.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I'd certainly like to add my own thanks to the peer review team. You've done a huge amount of very good work, and thank you very much for that. I was just going back to one of the Vox Pops that you had up there. I think I understood most of them, but there was one rather general one about regarding somebody thought that we'd got the wrong policies, and I wondered what to read into that. You could read in quite a few things, so maybe it was a rather reactionary comment, maybe they didn't understand, or maybe we really had got some policies that weren't correct. So if you could comment on that, I'd be interested.
Yeah, you've caught me out a bit there. Let me see if I can get this to... Yeah, go on, you can...
So the accrual, in fact, I'm sure Chief Officer argues on this as well, there's always a tension between policy paralysis, there's a policy for everything, in which case no one can manoeuvre unless they've got a policy to hang off of, because that way they can't be wrong, and the idea of people being able to manoeuvre and do the right thing. And there was a sense culturally that this organisation had relied on policies which gave everyone the security to be doing that thing. Now, as time moves forward, sometimes those policies don't move with you, and it means that the whole policy machinery has to keep working overdrive to keep up with modern life. Whereas many services now are moving away from kind of command and control policies into more permissive, enabling policies which allow managers and others to think for themselves within parameters. Same is true for fire authority policies right through to organisational policies. There's something about the noticing that Avon has been at a place where it required policies, very strict policies about how it operated, which it may not require anymore. That was the observation.
Mark?
Thank all the team for their work on producing this. I'm quite struck by the idea of an away day facilitated by somebody who isn't necessarily the home team to discuss the big issues, particularly with review of the Constitution. Many will know that I'm not comfortable with it. And the reason I'm not comfortable with it is that if the principle is, would this Constitution, as currently written, prevent what happened previously happening again? So if we had a time machine, went 5 years forward, different characters at the top, would this current Constitution prevent the things that happened previously happening? If the answer to that is yes, that's fine. If the answer to that is no, and that's the way I feel, there are a number of issues as to why that is the case, I think it would be hugely helpful with the new team that comes in, the new membership, perhaps if both of you are available, because you know us so well, whether you'd be in a position to perhaps facilitate a day where we could go through the Constitution and all of those policies and procedures and the big questions that are brought forward by this. I think that would be very beneficial for the authority as a whole. And it would help us and the new team, I may not be there, I hope I am, but I may not be, that would help us enormously guide us to what good looks like. Because we've been floundering around a bit and we're, as you say, buffeted by this inspection, buffeted by that report, and it would be good to have a calm process of the day, getting to know each other and talking about big questions.
Yeah, I concur with that. I think it would be really helpful. I think it would be helpful for the new entrants to understand the Constitution, the way it works, in a way that you could do it on an away day, which would probably be less effective if you were sort of talk and chalk at a session for induction, and really involve people and you know, that their DNA, their fingerprints are on it as well. So, you know, there's, you know, they have their skin in the game, so to speak. So I personally think it would be helpful because the way you are and because of your background in terms of, you know, the various reports and things. That for me would seem to be a reasonable way forward.
Nick Wilson?
Yeah, there are a few points I wanted to make, really, and some of them detailed, some of them global. I find myself agreeing with Councillor Shelford again, because the word culture came up in your presentation a number of times. And I think it's very easy to say, make glib statements about supporting the Chief Fire Officer, and, you know, I'm very happy with our new Chief Fire Officer, although I wasn't allowed to know that he was a candidate or have any process in the appointment process. One of the things that I think is wrong with this policy. But I think key to a culture of empowerment is trust. And I think we cannot ignore the fact that this is the only fire service in the history of the United Kingdom that's been the subject of mandatory value for money inquiry. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. And I think that stems from a degree of cognitive dissonance, namely some members of the authority who saw their loyalty as to Avon Fire and Rescue Service and the authority upon which they sat, and some members of this authority, of which I'm one, who saw their primary loyalty as to the people who pay rates for the service. And we saw a clear divergence of interest in which the brass were doing things which were good for the brass, but most people down the pub would not approve of. So I know we say we have to move forward and we have to celebrate our achievements, but I do think, and to use the pig analogy, you can measure a pig all you like. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And I think if we're going to get better, like an alcoholic, we have to recognise that there have been real issues here. And I am incredulous that the go Avon go mentality still persists. I'm not saying that we have to dwell in the errors of the past, but we have to recognise that real mistakes have been made And I think it was Einstein who allegedly said, to carry out the same set of outcomes and expect set of actions and expect a different outcome is the definition of lunacy. So I do just want to inject some reality into that debate. And there are deeply held views, and I don't think going on an away day is going to fix that. The second thing is to echo your very diplomatic points, Councillor Shard. You'll clearly have a career in the Foreign Service, should you wish to pursue it, as a refined diplomat. But I echo enthusiastically that this constitution is not fit for purpose. It's not a case of final adjustment. It's a case of bulldoze it and start again. And I would propose that we need to start from our core value system, which is embedded in our culture. Why are we here? What is our reason for being? And we have a duty of care to the people out there, and that's what I would suggest that we would all do well to remember that. It won't be me, and I think rather than give them a solution, I think it would be appropriate, as the Chair committed to us in the last Foreign Policy meeting, that the newly elected team, whoever that is, start, exactly as you said, to impose their own personality and culture on this organisation. That's the global points. In terms of the specifics, you mentioned something here. The role of the monitoring officer should be reviewed as priority with a view to assessing how to meet the statutory requirements of the authority. And I wondered if you would like to expand on that and explain what that means.
Okay, good. Can I start to deal with the other bit? The key for us when we came on site was the feeling of optimism. Now this isn't to like an Orwellian to change history and it was always wonderful, but actually not to allow what happened in the past to actually drag anchor on the future. And I think that's been very broadly accepted. That loyalty to whom? Well, actually, the ultimate loyalty should always come down to your community rather than your party or your authority, but because it's public spending. I think what we're trying to instill is that sort of culture of being as one as an authority, with a common sense of purpose and a common objective. The constitution you touched on, my authority's constitution is cut and pasted from my county council. We don't spend time worrying about it. With all due respect to the chairman, I let people talk for basically however long they want, whether it's 5 minutes or 3 minutes. If they get a bit garrulous, I say, well, I think we've had enough from you, thanks. And I mean, it's almost as Neil said, we don't want to be bogged down by too many procedures and rules. Sometimes need them. And Mark, you're absolutely right. We want something, I mean, we as in Avon want something that prevents the past from reoccurring, but we don't want to dwell too long in the past. You asked me a specific issue on the monitoring officer, which it is. I mean, I can tell you that we have a monitoring officer in my authority, who's the monitoring officer at the county council, who's not the authority monitoring officer. And it may be that in time you want to look at that, but whether or not it's the role of one individual to have more than two roles, that's up for you to determine. You're sovereign after all. It's not for anybody else to tell you.
But what's the recommendation? Splitting of the cloth?
Well, I'm slightly perplexed because the original recommendation does read as you say, and yet the chart that Emily gave us doesn't actually refer to it. But I think that we should. I think that it should be seen as to how that meets your requirements as an authority. It's not bringing a judgment to it. but there are various recommendations, and that's one of them.
Is splitting.
It
Can I
doesn't say
just
that.
please intervene here, because I think this is a completely inappropriate discussion to be having. I know exactly where you're going, Nick, and I don't want to go down. I think it's completely inappropriate. I think it's quite right that Nick Challard and Neil and his team have pointed out the fact that they do things differently than other fire authorities and fire rescue services, and we should. It's incumbent on us to review what we do. It's not a recommendation to say anything about effective members of staff. It's a recommendation to look and to adopt good practice.
It's about the role, Chairman.
I've just given you an answer. I do not want any more discussion on that particular item. Nick, do you have anything more you want to say?
No, I agree with you, Chairman. This is not for us to talk about individuals, it's about how the authority is run, and it was an observation that was made when we were on site, and it's just to be considered, that's all.
Alan Hale.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Sorry,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was slow raising my hand. I'm going to add one point to the question you asked about culture. And now something which I know, having spent time with the senior team and knowing many of them well myself, there's a bit in the report which says it's okay to challenge. So I think what you are seeing, and I know they mean it, not only is in the charter, it's in their behaviours too. So internally, in terms of the employed staff, the Chief Officer made it very clear, it is okay, in fact it's encouraged to challenge. If you don't agree with something that's going on or don't understand it, you're encouraged to put your hand up and to go and ask. I think that's a behaviour that is starting to become commonplace. It takes a while. It needs to be seen to be safe. It needs to be felt and talked about across the organisation for it to become natural and everyday. That will prevent history repeating itself in itself. The same thing needs to happen at our authority and be seen to be operating all the way through the organisation in all of its tiers. So I think that's one example just to reflect on what you said about the culture, because it is easy to say the word culture and it doesn't mean very much in a single word. But what I'm seeing, what we saw as a peer review team, was an intent and a behaviour which followed each other in that regard, and there are others too, which will prevent the past from repeating itself in the behaviour that we'll see.
Yeah, Chair. I think it was Councillor Eddie right at the outset who said we should be looking forward today and be positive. And I think it's a shame that the only person looking backwards is in fact Nick. And we know that it will happen every meeting. And the same subject will come up every meeting, and I have to say, it's tiresome, and I think it's also very, very rude to say that there are people sat around this table who ought to remember why we're here. Now, I find that quite offensive. I know why I am here. There may be some who don't know why they're here, but I find this offensive, and perhaps, perhaps not in this open forum, but in a closed forum, Nick should point out who he believes doesn't have the interests of those out there as part of why they're here. And I think that would be not unreasonable, because if he has that concern, then people within the authority need to know who he's talking about, because it may well be that they don't actually understand their role, not through ignorance, or not through a wish not to do what they perhaps ought to be doing, but that they don't know that they're not doing it. But I really believe that this authority ought to be looking forward and not harking back at every meeting, be it a subcommittee meeting or a full authority meeting, to a specific issue that Nick has.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Attorney James.
Thank you, Chair. I echo everybody's thanks to the team. The one thing I liked about this was it's actually, I think one of the first reports, it actually said something positive about this organisation, which makes a change. There's a statement about policy getting in the way, and I think I understand why it is. I think it's changing, and I believe that there's moves to change it. But we all know then it's a lot easier if you're worried that you're going to get knocked back every time you do something. Or say, right, well, I'll work to the policy. You know, it's just an escape route. We talked a lot about the officer-member engagement. And could I say, and this is to all members, that's a cop-out. We are all unitary authority councillors. We should have been trained to operate in that arena. I know that there are, the rules that I operate with my officers in South Clos, I treat them with respect, etc. I still challenge them. It's all the things that we talked about. I don't see any difference here, to be quite honest. I will talk to the senior officers. I'll talk to the guy in my local fire station. That's fine. I try and treat them with respect. I'm not rude to them. I don't expect them to be rude to me, etc., etc. But I don't see why anybody around this table should have a problem. Because hopefully that's what you do in your local authorities, isn't it? Thank you.
Senior Phipps.
Quite a general point, really. I'm just thinking around, I know nominally it says that we are here for 15 hours a month. I think actually it could be quite often quite a lot more. And I think that's important because we've got things, reading papers, a great file like this, it does take time. And to fully understand them, I think you need to read them thoroughly. So it is making that a real priority to make sure we all read our papers. We've probably said that before. But also, I'm just thinking about the meeting formats. Do we have enough discussion time in them? Not that I wish to have more meetings particularly, but we have had some really useful discussion times over the review period, and I think that is very, very helpful. Personally, I would really welcome a facilitated away day, because I think that gives us more time to discuss, and to work through things and better understand actually some quite complicated processes within the authority.
Bob Garner.
Thank you, Chairman. I do understand what Councillor Wilton means, and it is unfortunately true that we do need, as Councillor Hale says, to hark back to the past, because we don't seem to be moving forward as fast as we could. And I will remind Councillor Hale that he was one of the gang of 4 or 3 that had different views some time ago on a certain matter. And that certain matter has not been dealt with adequately until now, even. And therefore, Councillor Wilton is, I think, fully justified in going on and on and on about certain subjects until they get resolved. And I see no signs of them being resolved. They are being swept under the carpet. And that comment also applies particularly to the Constitution, and we'll come on to that in due course.
Could I add a comment on Councillor Phipps? I think it's up to the authority to determine how many committees you have and actually even the length of papers. And I would say I might struggle with all of the papers that you have to read as well. But I concur with you. I think having away days to think through some of the big issues is a much more conducive atmosphere than trying to do it around a committee. And think of all the time that it takes officers to write committee reports, when actually this is about members understanding and determining and agreeing a way forward without it being a lot of time and effort on officers to write a report that is then kicked around for ages. So I agree with you, but it's up to you how many committees you have.
Thank you. I was going to bring this debate to a conclusion. I thank you for giving your presentation. We are planning a way day in June, so there's a way day for the new members that's already getting trained. I do take other comments on board. I wanted to do we have a proposal and a second for my motion that we pass the recommendations en bloc to the new authority?
Shall I propose that, Chair?
Originally, anybody could second that one? Alan Hale. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you again. And if you'll excuse us, we won't stay for the rest of the meeting.
Well, on the second May, you'll review it on our
I shall.
I
I won't have anything else to do on the second. I'll watch it.
thought you saw the counts going on.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just have a point of clarification, because there's been a lot of mention of days, and I've taken that as just meaning any day, and you were mentioning the away day, but can you confirm that you're going to take into account that elected members can actually have day jobs, and it won't be a daytime away day? Yeah, because part of the problem with this authority is designed to make it convenient for pensioners to attend and not working members.
I do take your point, Ian, and I guess to some extent it's going to be dependent on the composition of the new authority. I do also take both Celia and Nick Sharp's point about this working more effectively. And you'll see in the papers one of the suggestions of reducing the number of committees down to 3. And I think we do need to work in a much more smart way. We don't bring incredibly long items on the agenda to the main authority meeting. We should be much more concise in what we do and actually debating more relevant items which are there for the service. So we'll revert back to the agenda. We've got to item number 6, which is public access. Okay, let's go on to minutes then. So item 5, the minutes of the authority meeting on the 13th of February. Our members, have you guys signed those the true and correct record?
Right.
Okay. So item number 7, committee minutes. 7.1, the General Purposes Committee on the 17th of January. Have that to be noted.
Right.
Okay. 7.2, the ordinary meeting of the Performance Review Scrutiny Committee. Tony Davis, who is behind me. Well, perhaps we've gone to 7 points, which Alan Hale is sat down in the correct place, which is the appointing committee on the 7th of March, minutes 19 and 20 and 26. And we need to ask people to go out of the room on that. We are happy for everybody to stay out. Okay, do you want to propose those on block then, Alan?
Yeah, well, as the chair has said, 1920 and sorry, try again. Minute 19, minute 20 under 7A, and also 7B. Essentially, at the meeting of the Employment Committee on the 7th of March, we considered the position of the interim treasurer, and however, in doing so, the fact that Martin Walberg's interim arrangement ends on the 31st of March, as well as Kevin Woodward's was overlooked. Martin is now on a phased return to work, and I understand that Kevin is available to us on a rolling monthly basis until the end of June. So therefore I would propose that Martin and Kevin are appointed joint interim treasurers until the 30th of June.
Right. We're happy to take this on block. Okay. Proposer? Richard? Seconder? Catherine? All in favour? Any against? Okay, thank you. Any abstentions? Anybody looking at that phone not interested in?
No, I'm listening. I just don't feel it's
worth bothering.
Well, it's passed. Do you want me to vote?
I don't mind. You do whatever you want. And now 7.2, Tony.
Okay. Yes, for the sake of brevity, can I just propose minute 28, etc. Lots of recommendations coming through. I won't read them out.
Do you have a proposer? Richard, seconder? Alan, all in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstention? Okay, can we go on to 7.4 then, which is for noting on the audit committee report?
Yeah.
Neil.
Well, we discussed part of this in the previous meeting, but there were a couple of points I wanted to draw attention to. One is extreme concern that Councillor Williams has failed to show on so many occasions. I don't know what might or could be done about that, but I think if any council carries on with this work, then some format should be taken. The other thing is I just wanted to make the point that if the regular chair is not chair of the meeting, then that should be explained in a minute so we know exactly who is doing what. So
Where are you, Councillor Bussett?
this is 7.4, which is an incorrect meeting. The only councillors present were Councillor Shelton and myself. And we tossed the coin as to who was going to chair and who was going to make the points. So I became the chair and Councillor Shelton made the points, but I think that needs to be reflected in the way it's written.
Well, I don't know if it's an appropriate time to raise this, and I'm slated if I talk too much, I'm slated if I don't engage, so I can't do that. But Councillor Scott made the point that for those of us who are in work, it's not a value judgment, it's just an observation. We have to balance conflicting priorities. My business colleague is abroad and I just got an important text message and I was castigated by the chair for dealing with that. And I have long been of the view that the committee system is far too bureaucratic and onerous. And Nick Chard said they have a constitution but they pay lip service to it because there's a relationship of trust between officers and members and they focus on the things that matter. We have an enormous... I heard the postman struggling to get this through my letterbox, and then there were supplementary papers as well. I feel we're in danger of over-codifying this authority and missing the wood for the trees. And it's music to my ears to hear the chairman say that he's considering a rationalisation of the number of committees, because I think there's far too much, and yet we don't discuss the really important issues that are ongoing in our authority.
I agree.
When you're right, you're right. What are we going to do to change it?
Well,
I would agree with that as well, that's a different point.
It will be for the new authority to decide. I think if Ian Scott makes a very valid point about everything on Radio Bristol about the lack of mix of the population on the authority generally. It's because we meet during the day when people are retired and easily come and people who are working fun more difficult.
Correct. Excludes women with young children.
We need to be much slicker in the way we do things.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are looking at noting the minutes. Is there any more comments on noting the minutes?
I was only going to make a comment in response to Martin Williams that it has been pointed that his absence has been pointed out to him, or his lack of attendance has been pointed out to him. The first time he offered to repay an allowance for whilst he was away, his monthly allowance. But each time when I circulate my group, he gets circulated, I get no response. So my only hope is that it will affect me, but that North Somerset knows his absence, and perhaps North Somerset should be told of his absence, so that come past May 2nd, there is no danger of him being put back on the fire.
Well, would you like me as the chair to write to the North Somerset leader?
Yeah.
That would be helpful, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes,
Yes, please. Do you want to sign it, Bob? Pointing out the fact his attendance is appalling, and actually it would be preferable to have somebody else to actually do some work.
Yeah.
Or worse, that
Yeah.
would define it slightly more.
Yeah.
Sensible
Mr. Chair, I just wonder if we could perhaps pause until after the election, because it may not be an issue.
No.
And therefore, if he is provisionally chosen to return to the Fire Authority by the leader of North Somerset, whoever that might be in the future, then it would be appropriate for you to write, or whoever replaces you to write, to point out the lack of attention. But right now, why? Why right now?
So if it's nominated, you're right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, when you want to address... Sorry, Councillor Dodd.
Could I give my apologies, please, for not being present at the 8th of March meeting and not giving an apology. I was, according to my diary, at the Hinkley Point A and B station site stakeholders group meeting on behalf of North Somerset Council, and due to a diary oversight, I failed to give apologies for the Avon Fire Authority meeting at the same time. I'm sorry. Councillor Wilton will follow on, please.
At an appropriate stage, I think you and I have discussed this and have a common view on about inclusiveness and diversity, and yet everything we do, we say that, talk it, then we write documents that make it more and more difficult. And within this constitution document are a series of penalties.
Well, we aren't discussing the constitution, are we?
When it's appropriate, but if we are trying to make this accessible,
yes,
for a broader spectrum of the population, like women with children who have jobs, who cannot go on away days and attend a plethora of committees, working groups and panels, then it would be useful if the way we organised ourselves reflected that aspiration.
I only wanted to say, in the previous meeting, the Asia meeting, I did raise the issue of the provision of financial services. So I'm just bringing this to full authority, as I said I would, for a matter of note, really, and we are going to move forward. Thank you very much.
With those exceptions, I was going to note them 7.4.
Right.
And 7.5, the DICE committee minutes, so we're happy to note those.
Right.
Okay.
Chairman, could I ask a question, please, on 7.5?
Yes.
This refers to meetings and relationships with SARI on behalf of the BME community. Are such meetings legally privileged? Are we exchanging views on a subject that needs a lot of attention, or are we simply going along with SARI's view on life as it is?
Well, I'm not lost. Are you referring to the away day we had?
Yes.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that was a training issue, which was not a public meeting.
I'm also referring to page 8, volume 4, page 8.
Yes.
When it talks, and page 9, it talks about diversity, which is fine. And it talks about the cultural awareness tour, which is fine. What are the rules of this tour? Is it a legally privileged occasion, or is it an opportunity for an exchange of views? If we go back to 7.4,
I think it's an awareness talk, Bob. I don't think it's anything more than that. If you wish to ask questions, challenging or otherwise, of people upon that tour, be they people showing us or the people who are co-learners, then that's, I don't see any issue in terms of that.
okay, well if you look at page 11 of the minutes, Councillor Johnson said various things that could be felt to be, if you're oversensitive perhaps, upsetting.
Well, Councillor Johnson was making comments of what she had learnt or otherwise from the tour. And that was for her to disclose that information at a public meeting, and any scrutiny thereof, I'm sure will take place. If you didn't say anything about the meeting, like I remember, then it wasn't recorded.
Well, these are minutes of a meeting.
Yes.
And it says quite clearly, Councillor Johnson stated.
Yes.
So presumably this was stated at the meeting.
That's what she said at the DICE meeting, because she was sat next to me.
Okay. I will come back to this in due course.
So
it's not of that, but of the topic. I did make the point that the Christian groups within Avon weren't down for a visit. And I would just like to think that they should.
Well, as part of the discussion of that meeting was in these minutes, there was discussions into where the tours were going in the future, and that's got their geographical sense, and I believe that points have been taken on board.
Good, okay.
Yeah, it was the Jewish faith being mentioned.
Yes.
Similar there.
So are we happy to note 7.5 and 7.6, which is the PRSC meeting, return takers proposal minute 42. Okay, propose that term.
Yeah.
Which is second, I think, all in favour?
Sorry.
Any against? No. Nice, thank you. So we now move on to item 8, urgent action, which I believe there is none. We will now go on to item number 10, which is the draft service plan consultation outcomes. I'm moving on that, so Chief Forrest.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Myself and other officers, other colleagues. If I start in terms of setting context, and I'll hand over to Justin and Amber to talk us through the consultation and our response to that. In terms of setting context, though, members will be aware that on the 20th of December, the authorities, our service plan, or our draft service plan, as it currently is, was presented, and members received the plan, considered it, and of course were happy with the recommendations to move forward for consultation, and to move forward for consultation in 3 areas. Those 3 areas were the plan in itself in terms of its general direction, and also from there as well 2 other areas where there were 2 business cases. One was around the proposal to change our response standards, and the other one was around our proposal to change how we respond to automatic fire alarms. Quite rightly, we went out to public consultation over an 8-week period, and we have received responses to that consultation, and what we wanted to present to members this morning was the process that we went through, the consultation itself, the outcomes from that consultation, the feedback that we've received, and then of course it's incumbent upon us to consider that feedback, and also then to adjust the plan and or plans and or proposals in relation to that consultation in response to that feedback. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'll hand over to Amber first.
Yeah.
So we're going to split this into a few sections. The first section is consultation, what we did, where we went, who we spoke with, and what the outcomes of that were. And then we'll hand over to Justin, who will talk about our response to that feedback from the consultation, and I'll wrap that up at the end and close that down. Thank you.
So in December, it was agreed by yourselves that we would direct consultation on the draft service plan and asking members of the public and staff and partners for their thoughts on 3 key areas. To underpin this, we produced a clear 8-week consultation plan with a comprehensive outlook at the different ways we would communicate and make the plan accessible to all. We had some clear objectives for consultation. Ultimately, they were to effectively engage with staff, with members of the public and with partners on the consultation, to consider the comments that were made in relation to the consultation and help that to inform the final plan which we bring to you today, and also to ensure the consultation was accessible to everyone in a myriad of different ways. So we consulted from the 7th of January through to the 1st of March, an 8-week period. And if you'll humour me, I'll just go through some of the things that we did over that time. So we sent 800 staff individual emails about the service plan, encouraging them to be involved in the process. This included updating them face-to-face over 300 internal communication activities led by the principal officers and other members of the team. We hosted 4 specific Chief Officer coffee and chat sessions at key locations across the service area where staff were invited to come along and put their questions to the Chief Fire Officer. We sent 9 written correspondences to our partners. So you'll hopefully note from the consultation plan we have 4 levels of key stakeholders. So the level 1 and 2 stakeholders we wrote written correspondence to. We held 5 public consultation events, and throughout those events distributed over 600 information cards. So these were, we based ourselves in high footfall locations where there were good transport links, where we could have a visible presence, local shopping centres. We went to Bristol, Bath, Weston-super-Mare, various other places, as well as holding the sessions at different daytime, evenings and on weekends to capture a good range of people and chat to them about the plan. We issued several press releases during the consultation period, and on newspaper coverage we have 5 different sources of coverage throughout the period. We made contact with, did an electronic mail shot to Clark's parish councils and a selection of local community groups as well. We also had some of our diversity and inclusion team targeting some of our harder to reach communities and underrepresented groups, pitching for agenda slots at the meetings. For example, the Bristol Older People's Forum, the Bristol BME Forum and the Deckbow Respite Care for the Asian Community. We had 2 BBC radio interviews and over 70 minutes of on-air coverage. So we had a 1-hour hot seat with John Darville in the breakfast show, where we took questions about the plan. People were able to phone in. Justin also took part in a 10-minute interview ahead of the public forum that we held in South Gloucestershire. Throughout the period, we had a comprehensive social media plan. We sent 37 tweets throughout the period. This reached over 656,000 people. What that means in terms of reach is that that's how many people it appeared in their feed, so through people liking and engaging with the posts. We had 568 people engaging with the post. It then led on to people sharing it and clicking it and it appearing in different people's feeds. This was the same with Facebook. We did 28 posts throughout the consultation period, and this resulted in 275 people engaging with the post, which made the post reach over 36,000 people. At the beginning of the process, for those people who didn't necessarily want to engage with the plan in its entirety, we produced a 5-minute short video which articulated the key points to help people form an opinion and sort of signposted them back to the business cases and the plan. And to date that's had over 170 views. We've also, all of the information was published on our website, on the Avon Fire and Rescue Service website, and to date there have been a total of just over 4,000 page views. So that's 4,000 people directly going to that page to either look at the plan or engage in the online survey. So whilst we were doing this, in terms of capturing different people's feedback, we had a completely anonymous online survey which had links to all of the information, access to the video, and had a series of questions which people were asked to take part in. We chose to make the survey completely anonymous to encourage participation, so it's expected we had a myriad of responses from staff, from local people, from partners, etc. So we had 5 written responses from partners which we proactively engaged with, and in terms of the online survey we had 173 responses. Like I say, the survey was completely anonymous, so we can't identify who made up that number, but it could be anyone, internal or external to the organisation, including local people, staff and partners. This does account for 0.017% of the Avon Fire Authority area population. You'll note, despite our efforts to consult with people and signpost them, the numbers are as they say, but we did all that we can during that time, and there could be various reasons that people didn't necessarily want to take part in this. Just to give you a bit of flavour of how this compares to the previous RMP consultation, so in 2016 the service received 195 responses to its proposed RMP. However, it could be said that the proposed changes during that consultation period were more contentious, and attracted a greater degree of public interest due to a change in the way we operated out of the Gate Fire Station. During that consultation period, 186 of the responses were online and the remaining 9 were through written correspondence. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of those who did take part in the online consultation, these were the overall figures for people who either agreed or strongly agreed with our proposals, aligned to the main 3 areas. Just to give you a bit more of a flavour of what underpinned these different elements, some of the key themes included, and which we sort of gathered the questions under, included, as you would expect, specific questions in relation to the proposed response to automatic fire alarms, as well as the proposed changes to response standards. There was a lot of concern, particularly around service cuts as a result of reduction in government funding. There were questions in relation to the weight of response, so the number of firefighters sent to an incident. In relation to responding to automatic fire alarms, we had a theme around the ability to accurately correct information from a caller to ensure that as a service we correctly categorise the incident and send an appropriate response. There was some questions raised in relation to the 1.9% of AFAs which on average result in a fire. Questions in relation to the perceived additional risk to community and firefighters. Some comments around the benefits relating to creating capacity as a result of the proposed changes. Comments and concerns regarding the Avon Fire and Rescue staff welfare. And also some comments in relation to the way in which the consultation was communicated. So these were from the online consultation specifically, but in terms of the coffee and chat sessions we hosted with staff, we collated all of the questions which echo the themes we saw in the external survey, and you'll note that in the report you can see all of the questions listed, and we provided answers to those to staff and published them on our internet. So I will now hand over to Justin to explain how we've listened and what we've done.
So within the documents that we've sent you over the last couple of weeks for you to look at, you have got the updated amended versions, and I'm going to go through some of those amendments, not all of them because it's a huge document and I appreciate you haven't got time to do that. But you will have seen within that document changes from the initial ones, so some of the text has been updated, and that was through staff feedback and through partner feedback as well, so we have listened to what's been said. As the information's come in, we collated it all, and we systematically went through and changed the document and updated it. And then Amber's team has put together that document, the feedback document around that, so you can see that feedback and that information. We also went away and done some additional delving into the questions that were raised, because obviously there's no point asking people for their views and opinion, and when they give back and question the 1.98%, when they question the weights of attack, we don't look at it and challenge ourselves as to why we put it in the beginning. There's some additional tweaks to some of the diagrams, again come from staff feedback around some of the figures and some of the ways that we actually displayed it, which we believe now has made it more user-friendly. We've made some changes, some amendments to the proposed response standard and the way that we actually report that. Okay, so not the standard, but I'll go through that in a minute, but how we're going to report it. And also an amendment to the automatic fire alarm response, and the amendment will be between the nighttime hours and the response that we send to that. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail now. So, in relation to the response standards to start with, we still believe that it's the right way to go with changing our response standard from a geographical base to a risk-based approach, where we actually prioritise it to those who most need. So we're still going to go with an average response, and we did a lot of work in the beginning through the workshops to talk through that. So we still feel that's the right way to go, because of several things. Government reports, the annual report for fire statistics for England is coming out. It changed in 2017 and was updated to an average response. So we believe that going forward we will be able to work with that and align, and we think that that's the way the UK Fire and Rescue Service is going. Right at the beginning at the workshop I said that in one of the presentations to those members who were there that we thought we were going to be really quite unique and one of the first Fire and Rescue Service to do the average response. We are now seeing other fire and rescue services using that, and I think that's because those national documents have changed and that's through user feedback. So, one of the questions was asked was around, well, you talk about your first appliance, but what about when you've got a larger response, more appliances going? We're going to commit to start looking at the attendance times of the second and third, and we're going to report that back through Performance Review Scrutiny Committee. We're going to do that with a time, and it'll be something like this, I believe, that we'll start showing to you. So we will show you the average attendance time of the first appliance. But what we're going to tell you is where there's a second or a third appliance disattended, what that time was additional to that first appliance arriving. So if you try and imagine it a bit like a Grand Prix, you get the first race car goes across the finish line, and then you'll get a plus time for the second and third of vehicles. We've got the data, we've looked at the data, and we believe that that's the most valuable way of doing it. It's valuable to our staff and myself because I will know that on average I'm going to get an appliance 2 or 3 minutes behind. And the data is there. We're using the data now more effectively to be able to produce these statistics. We will do that for critical and non-critical incidents. So that's how we're going to change, and that is the amendment to that element of the service plan. Okay, so we are going to commit to saying what our second and third appliance attendance times look like. So we can use that.
Can I ask a question? We go to
yeah,
the end.
Can I? I've got a period of questions at the end, so if we could lead it to that, that'd be fantastic. Also, a benefit of using that average attendance time for second and third appliances, we can use it in risk modelling going forwards in the future. So the new risk modelling software that we've produced, we can put that information in so that we know what that looks like around the service and any changes that will be impacted through that. The second change, which was to the second key theme, was concerns around the actual proposed changes to our response to automatic fire alarms. We produced some heavily database reports to support this. We've gone away and we've looked at it, and we're putting a proposed second change in that. In the initial draft document, it said that we would send one fire engine at all times to sleeping in high-risk properties. Okay, we're going to propose that we change that to the following, which is still to sleeping in high-risk properties. We will send one fire engine between the hours of 6 and 9 during daylight hours, and then we're going to upgrade that to send 2 fire engines between 9 and 6. Okay, that will give us additional firefighters going through nighttime hours. So if an incident did occur, we've got that weight of attack there to be able to deal with the incident, and we've got the appropriate resources being sent to the incident. There was a lot of questioning around the 1.98%. When we said that we weren't going to go to all automatic fire alarms anymore, the low-risk properties, if you like. So we went away and we did some further research. We looked at what that 1.98% actually looked like, so those low-risk properties. And I just want to give you some kind of figures, some average figures of what those incidents look like. Now, this is not where they're sleeping on high risk, because we're still sending a response to sleeping in high risk properties. This is solely to those other properties that we say we're not going to go to. So, the data that was used was between 2012 and 2017. Okay, so this is for non-sleeping high-risk properties, and on average, that was 15 incidents a year. Okay, that fall into that other category. So, on average, between those years, 31% of those incidents, those 15, had no fire damage reported. So that could be heat or smoke, but that's not reported through our incident recording system. That's how we report all the information from incidents that we attend. So that takes it down to 5 incidents a year. 46% of the fire damage was limited to the item first ignited. So on average, that's 7 incidents a year where an automatic fire alarm's gone off, and the actual fire is just solely to that item that's actually called fire. So it could be something quite small, a toaster, a cooker, something like that. 15% of that damage was limited to the room of origins. Okay, so that takes it down to 2 a year. So this is breaking down that 1.98% even further. And 0%, although it's 0.3, on average, is limited to the floor of origin. So we've got the data, we've really gone in and we've really looked at it to assess what the impact is of making those changes. And let's not forget, the reason that those changes were proposed was so that we can actually respond or use our resources better to respond to the community, to make them safer through prevention, protection, and also ensure that our staff are safer because it gives them the additional time to carry out their training to make sure they're safe to deal with the incidents when they come up. So this is kind of where I sort of hand back to the Chief, but to summarise it really, to say the service plan has been produced over the last 12 months. There's a lot of additional underpinning information that's gone into it. So you've been updated regularly, you've been given the baseline reports, the enhanced baseline reports, which gives all the supporting data. The team has produced the RMP risk register, where we take those risks and we risk assess them and monitor them going forward. Then we put it into the service plan itself. So we believe that it's underpinned by data now. It sets the direction of the service for the next 3 years, and we believe it satisfies some of the requirements that come out from those reports previously, from Dr. Baker, from the Fire Minister, because it is data-led, this service plan. And hopefully, at the end of the questioning, we'll be able to come over to you to be approved to go as our draft, our actual service plan now for the next 3 years.
Thank you to the team, thank you Amber, and thank you Justin, and thanks to the team for the work that you've done. I think it's superb work. Members will remember that I believe it was the 4th of September 2017 I put in front of you a one-year roadmap, which was to get us to a point of stabilising the organisation, putting foundation in place, dealing with the improvement plan, but also focusing on the future and actually putting things in place to provide us with the next 3 years in terms of a plan and strategy. This is that plan and strategy for the next 3 years. So a one-year roadmap, if you like, finishes on Sunday of this week, and then that's where this plan takes over as of the 1st of April. So the plan has been developed over quite a period of time. It's been developed over 12 months with members' involvement in the workshops that we've had, with members not just involved in engagement and obviously direction. We have developed the areas that have been requested. We went out for consultation. We developed the plan. We went out for consultation. I think that consultation was robust. I think it's limited in terms of the response that we've had. I think that is, as a result of, I think many organisations suffer from consultation fatigue, I would suggest, and I think that that's probably part of this. However, the consultation and the feedback we have had is quite significant, and actually it's really important that we listen to that and respond to that, which we have. And members will see, Justin's covered it, that the plan itself has changed as a result of feedback. There's feedback from members, feedback from partners, feedback from members of staff, and feedback from members of the public. And we have changed the plan and developed the plan in relation to that. What we've also done is, as Justin's covered, is we had two clear proposals. One was around changing our response standards, and the other one was about changing the way that we respond to automatic fire alarms, and in particular the reduction of activity of false alarms, so that we get that time to do more community safety work and more training, because it's really important that we're not spent a lot of our time just dealing with false alarms. So we went out for that consultation feedback came back, and I'm happy to respond to that feedback. Now, with our response standard, as Justin said, for me, it shouldn't be just about the first vehicle in attendance. It should also be about the weight of attack and the ability to do the job once you get there. So that's why I'm happy to, we lay out our response standard, which is our contract, or the authority's contract with our communities, to say we will get there for a critical incident on average 8 minutes. For a non-critical incident, which is still an emergency, on average 12 minutes. And for a non-emergency incident, that we will respond within a 60-minute period. But what we will do is we will make sure that we measure our weight of attack, i.e. our full predetermined attendance, our second and third vehicles in attendance. And we will report that on a quarterly basis to PRSC, so that members can be content that the standards and the performance is where it should be, and to challenge us and to hold me to account for that. Secondly, with regards to automatic fire alarms, Again, there is challenge and feedback quite strongly from members of staff and from the Fire Brigade Union to say that if you do go to a high-risk premises where there is sleeping accommodation during night time, then you probably need enough resources to deal with that incident. It's not just one vehicle, and I'm happy to respond to that. So I would propose, members, that we adjust that proposal to include that we do send that second vehicle during sleeping hours, so that does give the right weight of attack should an incident occur. The plan itself, as I said, has been adjusted and amended. The proposals have changed. It is the authority's plan. It does lay out the next 3 years, but what it does do is it deals with the continuation of the improvement plan and the improvement journey. It also looks at modernisation of our organisation and digitisation of our organisation so that we are coming to the 21st century, we are fit for purpose. It also deals with the issues around culture, and it also deals with the issues around making sure that we look after our staff better, which has been the highlight of focus. So we capture all of the improvement stuff, we deal with our ambitions, and we move forward, I think, with real optimism and at a real pace. And I would commend the amended plan with the amended proposals to the authority today. It is the authority's plan. It is incumbent upon yourself as a chief and us as officers to deliver on your plan. So that's probably all I wanted to say, Chairman.
Thank you. We have in front of us a recommendation in 2 parts, which is consider the outcomes of public consultation and subject to that the approval of the revised draft service plan. I first of all, before we start debating that, thank Amber for the consultation work. I think that you undersell yourself in what you've done, because they actually put the information out there, gives people a lot of feel security that we are doing what we're doing and why we're doing it. So if the other don't necessarily respond, I think I actually felt that we were listening. We got Radio Bristol's Pete Morning show was one of these great words, so thank you for that. And thank you as well, Justin, for you and your team in terms of the RMP. It's been a pretty substantial piece of work, to say the least. And I think that we as an authority should thank you and all the officers involved for the work that's gone into that. Now, questions. Are you going to take questions, Chief?
We'll do it as a team.
So Nick Wilson indicated first.
Yeah, I just had a couple of points, really questions rather than observations. I mean, I think the devil is in the detail with this. I'm very sceptical about quantitative targets because there's an inherent danger of management by objective, and that is whatever quantitative target you establish, the organisation will tend to strive to achieve that target. And I've mentioned this before, but there was a horrific incident in North Wales where the ambulance service let a guy with chronic heart failure wait for 4.5 hours, by which time he was very, very dead, because they had response standards and it was easier to take a drunk who didn't have his taxi fare home and achieve the standard. So I think what we all inherently know is the answer is it depends. It depends on the situation. So a lot of it comes down to definitions. So I apologise if this is somewhere in the paper, but defining what is a critical incident I've written here is going to be my first.
So there's additional work that's going on in the background. We looked on our mobilising system, we've got a call list of call types, so every type of incident is categorised, and that's what drives the mobilising system. So what we will do moving forward, we've done some initial work. So we look.
Justin, before I interrupt, sorry, I'm not sure answering the councillor's question now. My apologies for that.
No, that's okay.
I think it's just in terms of the definition, that's what you're after, councillor.
Yeah.
A critical incident is where there is a threat to life or there is a primary fire.
So that's the first decision point, which is quite critical.
And then it goes into the layer of detail that Justin was about to explain about incident types, call types, and a consideration by the call handler, a control operator, to say, is this a critical incident or not?
I think that's where the game is won or lost, is giving the person who receives the call the empowerment and the training to make effective decisions. I mean, I recall Rob Davies telling us about somebody smelled chlorine and we sent 4 appliances, because chlorine potentially is very hazardous to health. But smelling chlorine in the swimming pool is not an unusual event, and so we spent 4 appliances. Easily wise after the event. I'm not finding fault. But I think that decision is critical. The other thing is what constitutes a high-risk property or a low-risk property.
So that will be determined through risk stratification, a process that risk reduction are going through. We've brought some additional data in that risk categorises all the commercial properties within the service area. We will use that alongside the technical fire safety audit process and the information.
So if you've got an industrial property, that might be high risk.
Potentially. So
because I completely get it. You don't want to go out when the bloody toaster's gone off.
Yeah.
But if in the shed there's obviously acetylene torches and all sorts of other explosive gear, I mean, on my patch, Dundry, we had that guy who we knew was an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Where we consumed an awful lot of your resource for quite a considerable time, and more by good luck than good management, nobody was hurt. So I think that's the other thing I would say.
So that's where the risk modelling is going to come in, the new tool that we've purchased, because that will overlay the different types of data. So Experian do a risk rating for the fire sector of commercial property data, so they will give it an initial hit. We do our technical fire safety audit, so when they go out, they come back and they put information onto our CFMIS database. That can be fed in. All this information starts building up that intelligence picture.
I get all that. And then the last thing was, what's the logic between sending 2 wagons at night just because people might be asleep and therefore at greater risk?
So if it's sending the weight of attack to deal with it. So if that incident turns out to be a fire,
why is it more dangerous at night rather than at daytime?
Because at daytime people are awake more, so they will be able to alert, to do what we do currently, which is the call challenging, to say that there isn't a fire present, whereas at night people might not catch it initially. The alarm is actually doing its work. We've got the appropriate resource level going to deal with the incident at that time.
And last question is, are these standards each decided by each individual fire authority? So there's no national standard for this?
No.
There's no national standard.
No, there is no national standard, but there is some work going on currently which has started within the last 12 months through National Fire Chiefs Council, which we're part of and we're feeding into, where they're looking at the IRMP process. So what that looks like going forward, any changes as to going back to a national standard, I don't know, but there is the potential for that possibly.
Within the legislation of the Fire Safety Services Act, it's incumbent upon each service to have an integrated risk management plan. Incumbent upon each authority to have an integrated risk management plan. Integrated risk management plans laid out within this document. And those response standards are relevant to each authority. There is no national standard.
Appreciate it. Chairman, firstly, can I echo your thanks to the officers? Thank you. Secondly, I particularly welcome actually the offer to send 2 vehicles for nighttime activities where there's sleeping or high risk there. I'm particularly wanted to ask a good question about the time of 9 to 6 a.m. Now, I don't actually have my own view. I'm just seeking to understand your rationale. I assume during the British summer time, 9 to 6 is about correct. Although I guess an argument could be made that it could be longer during the winter and springtime. What's your view about that?
I think you have to choose sometimes. What we have to consider is our elderly population and our elderly communities, because they very often go to bed early, I would suggest, and as a result of that, for me, I think you probably need to extend it further than you would normally do. So I think 9 and 6 feels about right, and certainly our analysis of our incident types and calls during our periods of sleeping provides us with that confidence, I think, to pick those times. So there is no science to this. We feel that this is about right in relation to the way that we've analysed our data.
Well, I'd like to pick the gate because I normally go through by about 3 o'clock.
Tony Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Just a slight reassurance from me. You're saying, this feels about right, and I think you are probably right, that's about right, but presumably that is kept under review, and it could change. Of course. I have to say, Amber, you said about Yates had more things. I know I'm a councillor there, but I know all about having lots of points. I have to say, in fairness, and I'm pleased about the review, that if you Yates is actually now changing its timings because of information. It was 8 till 5 or whatever it was that the day crew were on, and it realised actually that the accidents they were getting were actually between 5 and 8 because it's sort of people coming home from work, traffic accidents, etc. They've now changed it so they work on a 12-hour shift, so it's 8 till 8. So there is that cover, the full-time cover on that. So I'm reassured by actually what's happened that review can take place. So with that assurance, I'm quite happy with it.
Sorry, the whole ethos, thank you, Councillor, the whole ethos of this plan is that it brings together our corporate planning process and the integrated risk management plan. And so that we do match resources to risk in our communities. And the whole ethos of this, by changing our response standards from a geography and population density base to a we will respond to incident and risk categories is I would suggest the right way to go, of course. As well as, of course, we will send the right resource and the right way to attack to higher risk premises. It just, for me, is logical.
I salute everything you've done, so I don't want to sound negative, but Oscar Wilde said a lot of clever things, and one thing he said was that rules are for the guidance of wise men and the blind obedience of fools, and I very much hope that there will be some flexibility in whatever standards we've got for the dispatcher to ask the right questions and form a view based on their operational experience.
So
this isn't always going to be correct, is it?
So if I may, that happens now, has always happened, and will always continue to happen. Our control operators, I think, they're absolutely fantastic at what they do. They do challenge at the right places, but they have absolute discretion to dispatch, if that's the right term, to mobilise the resources that they believe are appropriate.
New buses.
Thank you. I can well understand the pressures that have led to the risk-based approach and what else we're trying to do. And I was a little concerned at the public acquiescence in the moving down this road. It was in the 50s, I think, all those 3 indicators that you showed. I'm just wondering, are we the pathfinders in much of this, or have we got other authorities that we can look to, or to what degree are we taking a risk ourselves?
I don't believe we are taking a risk.
Okay.
This is all about risk management, isn't it? This is about the likelihood of something happening, and then when it does happen, the impact. Of course, we are in the business of risk management. I don't believe we are pathfinding here. Is my view. I think that what we are doing for the first time is saying we fully understand our risk now. We've done a lot of work around understanding who, what, when, where, how and why somebody's at risk within our communities. And what we are now doing is aligning our resources to match that risk. And we do it in the most effective way possible.
But there aren't any other authorities around the country who've been down this road to this extent so far?
Yes, there are. And we talk about automatic fire alarms in particular. Some services in the UK do not respond to any. And others, we're probably one of the only services that respond to all. Okay. So, for me, what we're taking is the right approach. The authority is taking the right approach in as much that...
Well, thank you for that reassurance. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before we go, I've got a couple of questions of my own. You did demonstrate on your little chart a normal distribution, so I presume we're going to use arithmetic mean for our calculation for our average. One thing that always does worry me, just echoing Nick Wilton's point, is about the deviation from the average. So we could be meeting the average, getting some instance in 1 minute, it's a tempo, and then taking an hour and a half a more distant one, and the same we've got the average. So I think we need to look at the deviation from the mean as well as the meeting the average.
That's been taken into account. Unfortunately, I'm not the clever one in the team that works with the data and knows how to do all the work. But there are people in the team who have undertaken that work. Just so that you're aware, we've not hit anything. The enhanced baseline report goes through the average attendance times of all our stations on our plant, so we were completely open with all that information. But yeah, the clever people who know how to deal with the data have done what they need to do, and I can just report that I'm happy with that.
And if I may, Chairman, when we report to PLSC our performance against our performance standards, we'll be able to show that.
So there's two recommendations for us to consider: the outcomes of public consultation and the approval of the service plan. Are we happy to take those together? A proposer? Richard Elliott, a seconder. Alan Hale, all those in favour? Any against? No, thank you very much, colleagues. And we'll now move on to the next item, which is item number 11. Now, as the constitution with the working group met last week, and most of the amendments have come through. However, we've had quite a debate on the constitution in the peer review piece earlier, and I think it would be, if nothing else, rude of me not to accept Nick Chard's offer on behalf of the LGA to facilitate an away day for all members of the authority to consider the constitution and the points raised in it. Therefore, I'm going to suggest that we scrap item number 11 and pass that to a new authority, and it's on the basis of the LGA facilitated away day, discuss the whole constitution moving forward. Happy to do that.
I'm happy to propose that.
And I'll second.
Okay, you all in favour of that?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now I ask one question, because I accept the generous act. I came here tooled up. But is it going to be for the new authority to start the clean sheet paper, or will they be working on this draft?
Well, this is where it becomes a difficulty, isn't it? Because this idea that we, as elected members, can magic up some way the authority works, bear in mind we have a set of standing orders already. We are effectively have got a template to begin with the current standing orders, and when we decide to change those standing orders, is entirely my remit. The idea of this constitution is imposed upon us by anybody who's indirectly or sovereign to determine the constitution. So I would be, it would be very remiss of me, and I think all of us, to do anyway saying to the new authority when they meet in the summer, this is the way you're going to do it, pal, we've decided in March. Therefore,
But Chairman, we spoke earlier in this meeting, and I was very delighted to hear your comments about too many committees, and you made an off-the-cuff remark about rationalising the number of committees.
But it's in the paper.
Well, in the Constitution it still talks about 5 committees.
No, it says no moving to 3, as a suggestion goes down to 3.
So, are we going to leave any road signs for our successors?
Well, what we will do is we'll pass on to the documentation we had today, we'll pass on to suggested amendments and say this is where it's going to be. There'll be a facilitated discussion on the Constitution, but it's up to that authority to determine. It's not for us to tell them what they're going to do. They will vote on and decide. Item number 12, which is
your last sentence is not for us, etc., etc. Does that mean that we're not going to apparently or seemingly railroad them into a rapid decision? Because I feel very strongly on the Constitution, and I think that when it starts after the new fire authority has bedded in and the training has taken place and the new members feel their feet, that then we should start a slow review of the draft consultation. I think it's common knowledge amongst some members that there are shortcomings in the Constitution as written, in that it doesn't deal with some things that should be dealt with. And I fully agree with you that we need a basis on which to establish a new constitution, 90% of which is quite boring and cut and stick is sufficient. But it's got to be done. But it's the 10% that worries me. And I'm afraid that I don't think that the constitution, as being rushed through, deals with certain matters. And therefore I think that in addition to delaying or deferring the consideration of the Constitution until the new authority feels able, that several months are allowed for a slow, careful review of the Constitution before it is in the position of being approved.
Well, I think that will be for the new authority to consider how they do it. Wouldn't it? They've got a constitution form work which is going to go on for seemingly forever, probably in about 9 months, which we've gone through almost line by line through the current constitution proposed today. Now, clearly there is some dispute. I'm not quite sure I understand fully some of the reasons for dispute. There is dispute. So we pass it to the next authority to do, Bob. I can't tell them what to do.
No, of course not. I agree with you entirely, but there is an ethos, or particular members even, that would want to speed it up. And obviously you're assuring me, in effect, that not only will you not be here, sadly, but...
Well, no, you're not be. That's the voters, this is it. You'll get self,
of course. But there will be no incentive generally in the cloud to rush through.
Well, the glacial pace at which we seem to do it so far, any moderate acceleration may be a slight advantage. But,
well, if you think this pace is glacial, heaven help us, because I think it is rushed Olympic standard. But there we go.
Shall we move on then to item 12?
By all means.
Could I make a supplementary proposal that we ask you to write to Nick Chard to say thank you very much for the kind offer, we would like to take you up, and that we would trust that he would facilitate a sensible debate on the big questions in order to bottom out the issues so that it would not be rushed and would take all of our concerns into account for the meeting.
Chairman, may I make one last comment?
Well, Richard Eddy put his hand up first, so...
I beg your pardon.
I didn't actually plan to speak to this, Chairman, but I agree with Mark's suggestion. The point I wanted to make, there are more long-standing members than me who are better placed to comment on the Constitution. What I would just say, bearing in mind the process, we've had a constitutional working group, and every committee of us have had a chance to consider our concerns and issues. It does seem to have been fairly open system up to now, and I'm just comparing it highly to its credit. With Bristol, we changed our constitutional, or at least the mayor put it through last year, and we did have a constitutional work group who thrashed out the proposals. Then, less than 24 hours before the group leaders met to consider it, the mayor sent new proposals round which didn't mention anything discussed. All I'm purely saying is, as principle, I think we started from a good place this time.
I was very interested by Charles' comments that, as chairman of one of the most successful private churches in the country, sent here to mentor us, that they don't really bother with the Constitution. And I think that's significant because it's reflective of the culture in which there's an atmosphere of free expression and of mutual trust between members and officers, which sadly is lacking, as we've seen today. And I think there is a danger of missing the wood for the trees. So if one chapter in this Constitution, which I did read several times, spoke at great length about a zero tolerance policy of fraud, and yet there was no substance to it whatsoever. And I think what we need to do is get back, those of us who are here next year, to get back to see the wood rather and not miss it for the trees, and get back to the core principles rather than focusing on codifying everything. And there are a lot of subjects. I would like to write to you afterwards, Chair, for the remainder of our mandate period, so that we capture some of the key themes. Because there's an awful lot of subjectivity in this document around appropriateness, members' conduct. There are many around this table who regard my conduct as inappropriate. Words like inappropriate, respectful, and try and create an atmosphere in which we can disagree respectfully.
So I will write to Nick Chard.
Which page?
I'm sure the clerk will help you in that. And we will pass this on to papers as of today to the new authority to facilitate the away day. Now we move to item 12, which is the HMIC FRS inspection report action plan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
The delegation.
Well, it's a team. We are a team. I will introduce this again, and I'll ask Pete to take us through the paper and the process that we've gone through. So members will be aware that on the 20th of December that the HMIC FRS, the Inspectorate's report of the service in July was published on that day, and obviously we published our response to that report on that day as well. What happens in terms of the process is that you have 56 days to respond to that report. And as an authority, what we've done is prepared that response on behalf of the Chairman and members to that report, which effectively becomes our action plan, which HMIC FRS will performance manage us against. So I'll, without further ado, I'll ask Pete to talk members through the process and what we've actually done and where we've got to with this. But you'll see within here is a really coherent action plan about how we respond to the individual areas of concern and the individual areas that we need to. Thank you. Pete.
Thank you, Chief. Chair, members, colleagues, good afternoon. My job today is to take you through report number 12, which presents to you our action plan in response to the first inspection report for Avon Fire and Rescue Service from the relatively newly constituted Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. Two things which the report recommends to you. One is to note the action plan, which I'll talk about more in just a moment, and the second bit is to agree the way in which members will be involved in ongoing scrutiny of our progress with that action plan. So just as a very quick recap, you've heard this before, but in terms of the new inspection regime for the 45 English Fire and Rescue Services, Avon Fire and Rescue Service was placed in tranche 1 in the first of 14 fire and rescue services to undergo the new HMIC FRS inspection process. It seems like we've been doing this forever now, although this is actually only our first round. It will, of course, become business as usual beyond the lifetime of the time-bound improvement programme. So whilst the Chief constituted the improvement team, the internal improvement team, to take care, amongst other things, of our first round of inspection under the HMIC FRS process, it will become ongoing business as usual following the closure of the improvement programme in the summer. So in terms of the HMI inspection, they looked at three principal questions around our effectiveness, efficiency and our people. And that involved a range of inspection activity which started, believe it or not, all the way back in April 2018 with the first data collection, and then went through a number of stages, including informal visits by our service liaison lead from the HMIC FRS, some more formal initial discovery days, through to the Chief's strategic briefing, which then culminated in a week of on-site activity with 10 inspectors on-site looking at all aspects of the service across those three pillars of effectiveness, efficiency and our people. You'll recall that following, I think, 2 or 3 delays in publication, the first round of reports were published by HMIC FRS, and that coincided with the authorities meeting last but one on the 20th of December. And the results there are noted in Table 3 against the 3 pillars. Now, as a result of that publication, we had in our report a number of areas for improvement highlighted and 3 causes of concern, and they are highlighted in Table 4 in your report. Along with the 3 causes of concern, there were 6 associated recommendations which HMIC FRS made, and the process is such that we needed to respond with an action plan to those recommendations within 56 working days of the publication of the report, which took us to the 12th of March. So therefore, as Appendix 2, you will see what our current action plan against those 6 recommendations included in 3 areas of concern look like. But in addition to that, we've also taken the position of setting out our action plan also in response to the 15 areas for improvement. So as a consolidated, open and transparent action plan in response to the findings of HMIC FRS, that has been produced as that action plan at Appendix 2 to your report. In terms of next steps, we have a further revisit from the HMIC FRS to assess our direction of travel and progress against our action plan in July this year. Initial indications are that that will be a smaller team, more akin to the revisit that we had in October last year. So that's probably going to be 2 or 3 days worth of inspection activity with around about 4 inspectors. And their job, and in line with the requirements of the national framework, published at regular intervals to provide to our communities an update on progress with the HMIC FRS inspection findings. Members will recall that in the Baker there were some concerns raised around member involvement in scrutiny of progress against our fire peer challenge report. In order to directly address that, our recommendation in recommendation 2 of the paper is that, as well as regular managerial progress assessment at service leadership team meetings on a monthly basis, members on the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee, or whatever subsequent committees may take over the scrutiny function, also receive regular reports about our progress against the HMIC FRS action plan. So the 2 recommendations: note the report, note the action plan, and agree an eye on progress.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Can I thank you, the team, for putting this together, which is terrific. And I'm absolutely delighted to see hot, wet bodies responsible for each point, which is terrific. So that we can go back to people as we go through this and as we develop them, that there is somebody ultimately responsible for delivering each one of it. And I'm really, really proud of that. So thank you for putting that in.
Comments, questions, queries? Thank you. As my comments, Peter's has been outstanding in terms of coordinating this work and leading on this work for us as a service and an authority. And I think the work that he has done has been outstanding.
Perhaps we could phrase outstanding. We got a standing point. Yes, thank you Pete and all the teams, I know it's been an awful lot of work to get together over quite a long period with an awful lot of detail and lots of things going on in the background. So thank you for that. Are we happy as members then to accept the two recommendations? Where was it? Neil, seconder? Mark? Those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Now, I was going to suggest that it is 10 to 1, and we will certainly want to do our best to make it for capital strategy, but we take a 10-minute break now. So if we could resume at 1:05. Shall we recommend? I appreciate some people are still in school, so I'll ask them not to use the capital strategy if you like.
Good afternoon, members. I think we're about to start again. We know that item 13, which is capital strategy, which starts on page 279 of the agenda. Hopefully, Chair, I can help you generally be fairly brief on this one, just to update members on the reason for this report. Members will be aware at the last meeting in February we talked about everything to do with money in terms of the budget and also the capital programme and also the treasury management. Ideally, I would like to report the capital strategy for that meeting. This is a new requirement under financial codes for all local authorities to produce and have approved by members a capital strategy. I have to say I didn't have time to bring it to the last meeting. I felt for myself I needed to do a bit more research in terms of understanding the authority and how the capital programme and funding is put together. So, for this report, there shouldn't be anything new in here. Really, the idea is to bring together everything to do with capital in terms of how capital is defined by the authority, what influences what is in the capital programme, which is very much aligned to the service plan, to bring together how the capital programme is funded and how decisions are made around affordability, and also to focus on governance to make sure that there is sufficient scrutiny over the programme and monitoring during the year. So this report brings together everything that I see that's happening at the moment. What I would say, it doesn't mean to say that what we're doing at the moment is the best that we should be doing. And I'm saying that it's been a common thing this morning is that just because we've always done something, it doesn't mean to say we should continue to do so. So whilst this is my start of attempt in terms of how we deal with capital at the moment, that doesn't mean to say that it shouldn't form part of any constitutional changes that take place over the coming period, because I think we're all understand it's important that the finances, both capital and revenue, maintain a high degree of scrutiny and focus. So hopefully the report itself is self-explanatory in terms of bringing together how the authority operates, everything to do with capital. If I may, I just wanted to focus a little bit on the capital financing charges, because I'm conscious at the final authority meeting there was a comment from Councillor Shelley, around a lack of any information. Not that there wasn't a descriptive table that said these are capital financing charges. So I take the opportunity to include us in this report. So paragraph 3.22. You will see a table which is an extract from our financial indicators. Just to remind ourselves that the final authority I explained that the capital programme will require our borrowing requirement to go from 16.5 million to 22.2 million by 2022-23. Based on our estimates of today, this will be subject to change during that period. And then the question was, well, that's fine, but what are the capital financing charges emanating from that programme? So in 3.22 on the lower box, I have included debt repayments and interest costs. So from 2019-20, included in the revenue budget is 1.274 million of capital financing costs. To go over the 4 years, that will go down and then go up against 1.292 at the time when we start borrowing again by 2022. So hopefully, thanks to Sherpa, that gives you that information. The key point that I raised or highlighted at that meeting was saying that the debt charges ratio emanating from those charges will be below the 6%, which is the self-imposed ratio that this authority set some time ago. So we're about 3%, well below that 6%. So that was the test that this authority set itself with board affordability. So that's where we are in terms of that ratio. I just thought it would be helpful to further explain where I've got debt repayments MRP. MRP stands for Minimum Revenue Provision. I did touch on that at the meeting, but I thought it was worth just explaining what that means in relationship to that figure. So we have guidance from the government as to how we calculate what's called a minimum revenue provision. And what this is a charge to the revenue account to account for the usage of an asset. So if I say to you that the debt that we have on our books at the moment is a maturity loan, so they're not repayable until 20 years' time. So that, unless we start repaying debt, that 7 million will stay on our books. If we were not prudent, we could just leave it until then and say, well, we'll have enough money at that time to pay that 7 million. That's not the way anybody would want to operate, and I wouldn't suggest that this authority will operate along those lines. But what the MRP does is it forces us to make a charge to the revenue account to make sure that when those loans are outstanding, we have enough money to put aside to repay that. So that 1,053,000 in 2019-20 is calculated, and based on a calculation that I'll touch on in a moment, but that is not a cash entry, it's an accounting entry. So at the year end, we will charge the revenue account with £1 million. That £1 million will be sat in our cash reserves and accumulate so that we can repay the debt at the appropriate time. So it's very much about prudence, but making sure that local authorities ensure that they're able to repay their debts at the appropriate time. In terms of that MRP calculation, in that previous report that we considered in February, there was a statement within that report which is called the minimum MRP statement, which is something that has to be approved by the authority. And in that statement, I outlined how we make that calculation. And just to say, within the guidance, there are 4 possible methods of calculating our MRP. Just to quickly go through the 4. Option 1 is what's called the regularity method, and that is based on 4% of our borrowing requirements. So the calculation is 4%, which is effectively 25 years. That's the theory behind it. So if we spend money on a building, then the use of the asset will be effectively 25 years. The regularity method is used by this authority only for borrowing before 2008. And the relevance of 2008 is that's before the Prudential Code came into being. Those members that might have been around at that time and had some understanding of capital at that time, you may remember that before the Prudential Code, we were told by the government how much we could borrow. So they would give us what's called basic credit approval. So they would say to us, your DCA is £500,000, that's all you can borrow this year, so that's it. So you have to do your capital programme around that. So on that basis, the government at the same time did include something in our revenue support plan as grant funding to repay the debt over that period, and that was based on 4%. So the regulatory method is just to mop up those decisions that were made before 2008. So we, as an Avon Borough Authority, we use option 1 for what is called supported borrowing, so that's borrowing before 2008. Anything after 2008 is what's called unsupported borrowing, because the government do not include anything in the grant settlement to repay debt. So everything is funded from within this organisation. So anything post 2008, this authority uses option 3, which is asset light method. So Our MRP is calculated based on the use, we actually assess the borrowing from an asset. So what we do is when we work out our MRP, we work out how much borrowing is associated with estates, and if it's estates, we would charge based on the 25-year life. If the borrowing is in relation to fleet, then we would charge our MRP based on a 13-year life. So you are charging your revenue account as the life of the asset basically. So at the end of that period, you will get paid that borrowing. Obviously, new borrowing is coming on all the time, but that's the way that you have to do it. Just quickly mention the other options. The other option 2 is the CFR method, and that is enable the lender to continue with the regulatory method post 2008. So I wanted to. And option 4 is a more calculated calculation, which is based on depreciation and assessing impairment and impairments to assets. So what we do is fairly common with local authorities which come across with different issues. But certainly for a cyclical fire authority, what we do is very much in line with what happens elsewhere. Chair, I think that's all I really wanted to say. Just to say, in terms of this report, just to bring in some of the issues from the last time. But the capital strategy itself, this is the start of 10. It will need to be continually reviewed as the organisation moves into the period. And as and when a review would be required, then we could bring that back. I would ask members to approve the capital strategy as is. The rules say, the guidance says that we have to, the law says we have to approve by the 31st of March this year. Ideally, we would have brought it back before, but hopefully members will understand things haven't been normal in the last 9 months.
On the 29th of March, be okay.
Yes.
Well, we were asked to approve the capital strategy outlined. Do we have any debate? They might show us in the
If I could just ask a couple of questions. First of all, thank you very much for this work. It's very clear and helps to answer some of my questions. Although it has raised a couple more questions, which I would like to bring forward to the next audit committee, where we look at that rolling programme against the money that we've set aside per year. So, from a risk perspective, the committee are satisfied that has indeed done what we say it's going to do for this, so that the free cash reserve is completely separate from the allocated cash reserve against the payments in the schedule. That's question one. Question two. Previously I asked about the Bath Fire Station refurbishment programme, asking for the cost-benefit analysis and whether, from an operational perspective, it was in the right place. Because we had that risk assessment done, which suggested that it should be in Twerton or should be at the top of Rathan Drive. And where we're going with that, because it sort of kind of gone quiet on where we feel that we should be doing. Are we just refurbishing the Bath Fire Station, terrific, or actually it's not in the right place to be able to service the fires that are in that area? No, so I quite like that goes to the next audit committee.
Thank you. We leave it to them. Any other comments, questions? I'll go to the vote then. So, can we propose it, please? Morgana, Mark Shuffle seconding. All those in favour? Any against? Thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Item 14 then, Lynn.
Yes, this is the firefighters pension scheme, which I'm afraid it's a very thick bundle. Item 14 is a separate bundle as an item. So we've got 4 schemes. We've got the 92 scheme, the 2006 scheme, the 2015 scheme, and the compensation scheme. They each have a set of discretions. This process was started when Martin was still in post before he was ill. The discretions that we need to have in place, we've got a full list from the Local Government Association to check what exactly we need in place for each of the schemes. And then we've also checked them against a couple of other fire authorities. They've been presented to the Pensions Board for consideration. The FBU have reviewed and commented and agreed. They've also been circulated internally within the fire service, and they now need to be approved by the full fire authority going forward.
Okay, you finished? Well, you can say that these are Chris Jackson or Chris Windows are here. You're on the pension board. Bob Garvey, your name's mentioned as shadower for pensions. Do you have other comments?
No, I wouldn't, thank you.
You could.
Except to say, I'm sure that the officers have gone through this thoroughly, and I'm minded to approve the recommendation.
I've also went through it in some level of detail, and I'm not sure I know any more when I started. It does seem very comprehensive.
On that exact point, it's a cracking read of an evening. And if you're suffering from sleep deprivation, I promise you, reading this puts you straight to sleep. I think I must have read a couple of those paragraphs about 8 times between them. Anyway,
I think all of you would be in order. You recognise.
The serious point, though, is having read it, I still don't really understand the risk to the fire authority of the change in the funding formula for the pensions, because it's not really mentioned here. So this is just the pensions scheme. This is a combination of pension
Yeah,
schemes.
so this is nothing to do with the funding of the pension scheme. It's the specific circumstances that might apply, which some of them are fairly likely to apply, others are quite remotely likely to apply. And it's what we, as a service and fire authority review, will do in those cases to decide what's going to happen in the individual treatment of that case.
So where annually do we review the risk of the pensions apart from the financial statement? Is there a specific, do you in your shadow work on the pensions gang look at the risk authority of the total pensions bill?
There is a risk register that the pension scheme, the pensions board have, that's updated at each meeting.
I think that this is a good example of it is like it is, rather like performance of fire engines going to fires through the traffic and whatnot. Yes, it is there, that's what it is, and the pension is also wrapped up in 3 previous schemes, including the existing one, and that's what it is. And provided the correct figures have been put in the correct places and they are consistent, then there's not a lot to say, except noted. Thank you.
If I may, there are 2 separate issues here. One is the actual schemes themselves,
And this is the discretion.
and the rules around that, and the discretions that are afforded to the authority to make on an individual basis depending on each case. So that's what this paper is about. What Councillor Shelford is asking is about financial risk to the authority as a result of changes that have happened from a GAD perspective and revaluing pensions, which is a financial risk. And I would suggest that that is a financial decision or a financial consideration for the authority rather than being this. Now, where that's reported, I would suggest is within the budget reporting and the financial planning for the organisation.
I get that that's how it is today, and that's how it's been reported before. But shouldn't the people who review the pensions in order to do the pensions should also be reviewing their risk at the same time? Should it not be brought forward to the audit committee to review that risk?
the incidents of future events that would give rise to discretion being exercised are unpredictable. Noting your interest in statistics, it could be predicted that there's a mean risk involved in the incidence of incidents occurring in the next year, but that's small beer compared with other things. So it's a good case of whatever. If these incidents do occur and we do have to use that discretion and it does cost money, so what? It's understood to be something that could possibly, but not certainly, happen.
So, Mark, in terms of noting what you've said and asking the audit committee to look at it, which I think is quite a central process, are we happy to move forward to the approval discretion? Do we have a Bob? You were proposing, didn't you?
Yes, I propose.
So we second that? Hale, all those in favour? Any against? No abstentions, thank you very much. We move on to item 15. Kevin, you're going to resolve the whole problem, I understand, is that right?
Yes. Carrying on the theme of money. I mean, this builds on the previous report at every meeting where we try and resolve anything to do with Brexit might go today, tomorrow, or next month. So this is very much about the medium-term financial planning, and it links to the issue that Councillor Shelby just mentioned. There are risks in terms of the future. We approved the budget and a medium-term financial plan in the previous meeting, and I presented the budget in the sense it was not just about 2019-20, it's very much about our 4-year plan. And during that 4 years, there were a number of uncertainties. The biggest of which is the issue of where this might go with pension. We already know that there's a huge bill coming from April from next month. The employers' contribution rates to defined pension schemes go to 30%.
It's an average of 30%.
So currently 17%, so they're doubling. So for us, if I remember the figures correctly, that gives us an additional bill of about 2.3 million in 2019-20. The government have said they're going to pay 90% of it in the next year because this has come in short notice, in the plan for this. So for next year, we build in maybe 230,000 in the budget. But the big question is, the year after that, to what extent the government might continue to fund that 90%, take it away completely, or taper it gradually, and that nobody gives the answer to that or not. So built into our medium-term financial plan is the worst case scenario that they take away that 90% completely. We do know that the pensions bill might not stop, that there are other issues around it will be debated and resolved in the coming years, I would suggest. So that adds to the uncertainty. I also highlighted the fact that for 2020-21 there will be the issue of the spending review and the issue of the business retention scheme moving from 50% to 75%, and on top of that there's the fair formula funding review, and where that might go for the fire sector. So there are a number of uncertainties that we try to build into our medium-term financial plan. The criticism, I don't think it was meant to be a criticism, but one thing we haven't done is assess any impact of Brexit. And I haven't really done any evaluation as to what Brexit might mean in terms of the medium-term financial plan. So I was tasked...
Do you think it's a record? It's just 3 hours and 37 minutes to mention Brexit for the first time. I think you should get a pat on the back for that.
I'll try not to mention it again. So what I'm trying to do in this paper is just to have a high-level assessment as to the sort of things that might affect our funding. I'm only concentrating on the funding side of it. I mean, members will be well aware that there's a huge amount of work going on in terms of our contingency planning for Brexit and no deal and everything else from the operational side of things. So I was tasked to go away and have a look at what Brexit might mean for the long-term financial plans, and it is difficult to isolate. It was impossible to isolate Brexit, I would suggest, from all those other uncertainties that I just mentioned. It's another layer of uncertainty, and we hope not all of those things will adversely affect us. So there needs to be some sort of waiting to try and think about to what extent the worst case scenario might be. So we do need some more work to do, I would suggest, in terms of scenario planning. But more importantly, it's about working the service and authority working over the coming period to make sure that we're in a good place to respond for 2020-21 onwards. For 2019-20, members will be aware this is year 4 of the 4-year settlement. So I would suggest to you that whatever happens this year with Brexit, I don't think the government are going to give us any support. I think they would say to you, well, you should have reserves to be able to deal with anything in this year. And my assessment would be that our reserves would be able to cope with anything in 2019-20. And I've tried to sort of put some numbers on what some of the issues that might hit us, particularly around business rates and retention systems. If no deal becomes to reality, and that affects the economy seriously, and there'll be some leading time to this, but I'll try to give some figures of what that might impact on us. So, but my view is that we would have sufficient reserves to get from 1920. 2020-21, I think, will be a bigger debate, because if there are inflation issues coming from the no Brexit, then that's going to have a huge impact on public services generally, and we would expect the settlement next year to reflect any inflationary pressures, any payroll pressures, and any other issues that might come out of Brexit. So there would be a huge debate in terms of 2021 onwards, and I would say to you that we will play a part in making our views known as part of any consultation around the spending review. So it doesn't answer anything in this paper, it just tries to highlight some of the issues that we'll need to think about in terms of medium-term financial planning. My suggestion would be, and we won't be here, but my suggestion would be that we think about trying to put some specific earmark reserves aside for any unforeseen costs from Brexit. We will be putting in the accounts to the authority shortly in the coming months. And 2018-9, which finishes next week, Sunday, we are anticipating an underspend on this year's current budget, somewhere in excess of £500,000 from the latest figures. So, depending on other priorities that might be there at the time, I would suggest that Brexit might be the top priority when we come to the authority in May to say that we haven't underspent the last year, and a good use of that money might be to put it aside to help us give some further financial support for any increasing costs that might come from Brexit. I've got there, so I think my view was it's difficult to do this in isolation from the overall picture for the next 2 years.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I think also you've given us some food in terms of the chart and the mitigation as well. Is there any debate, questions, Popcorn?
Would you excuse me, please, Chairman? Okay. Car parking, Gordon.
Okay. Other than that, other than Bob's departure checks, that was an early one. Shall we note this and move forward? Mark, sorry.
So, first of all, I think we should take Kevin's recommendation seriously, that we should squirrel away that £500,000, not only for whatever might come from Brexit or not, but also from the concern about pension fees. That would be point one. The second point is that post the new authority, you or your successor should write to the Fire Minister and say, we have great concerns about this black hole opening up ahead of us about pensions because of the change in the Treasury decision on it. And whilst it's terrific to know that we've got 90%, not having the assurance of where we go thereafter is causing us great concern. Now, if they laid out a 2-year plan of going from 90% to 0, that's one thing we can We don't like it, but we know we can plan for it. Not knowing and having cliff edge is something that is a great concern, and that's what I would commend, as I say to you, your successor should write to the minister saying, please help us with this.
National Forestry Council review also.
Yes, should we say there's a lot of conversations going on nationally. National Forestry Council are having conversations with Treasury and Home Office, and also the Fire Finance Network as well, which is all of the treasuries of all the fire rescue services having those conversations. The Fire Finance Network, I would suggest, will make that submission, but I would absolutely recommend that the authority makes a submission as well in terms of concerns about that.
Sure. So you happy to note that, move forward. Item 6 then is the forward plan. That is as it was previously, with one exception, which is the item listed on page 294, which is the collaboration strategy being removed. So are we happy to note the forward plan? Thank you. And we go on to items 17 and 18. This is Rob. These are for noting or in highlights you'd like to.
I've got a couple of share please. Good afternoon, members. With regards to the service delivery risk reduction update, paper 17, we're with the movement of the service plan. That service plan now with the RMP linked to it now provides us with the revision of the service delivery strategy. As it is at the moment, we've got a risk reduction strategy and operational response strategy, but we've got one service delivery directorate. So we're bringing those two elements of the directorate together for a service delivery strategy that mirrors the outcomes of the service plan and the RMP. So that's all I wanted to mention on that one, Chair, and again for the paper to be noted.
Are there any questions, comments, queries? Thank you, Rob. Very comprehensive as ever. And fire incidents?
Again, Chair, that's a range of 10 incidents, not the only 10 incidents the service has dealt with since the last reporting period, but it just gives good members a good spread of some of the incidents we've had. A couple of notes, the New Year's Eve incident on Foundry Lane Speedball, very serious incident, over 60 breathing apparatus wearers into that incident. I was actually at that incident and our crews did a fantastic job. We have got some fire safety issues with that building, that's ongoing. So it's just an insight I wanted to point out, Chair.
Particularly difficult, with a rough sleep. With a rough sleep as well.
It's got various occupancy in that building, yes.
Perhaps in noting any comments, queries, questions? Okay, thank you, Rob. So the item 19 date of the next meeting to be confirmed. And now we go on to item 20, which is to exclude the press and the public. Resolve that the public be excluded from meetings from the following items of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to section 12A part 1, 1972, as well as section 12A part 2, paragraph 10 of the 1972. The public